think about defining disappointment first of all. And there was a little definition that is, I don't know, I wouldn't say it's depressing, but it's sort of the reality of it all, which is that disappointment equals expectation. So what we expect to happen over the reality, what actually happens, and that the greater our expectations of a situation, what we want to happen, what we think will happen, what we hope will happen, and then the reality of what actually happens, the greater the kind of difference between those two things, unfortunately, the greater the disappointment. But what we don't really want to do, I don't think the answer is to lower your expectations of work and life, because that doesn't feel that motivating. I think what we need to do is get better at dealing with disappointment. So it's almost to recognize that it is inevitable, like along the way. If you are going to have hopes, if you're going to have desires, if you're going to have ambition and aspiration, I think what you just have to recognize is that sometimes there's going to be a bit of a gap between what you want and what happens. But you don't have to lower your expectations or get discouraged by disappointment. You just need to have some ways to respond to it so that you can recover from it quicker. But it's sort of inevitable is where we got to. And there are, I wanted to kind of ask you a little bit here. There are 3 different ways that you might experience disappointments. So there could be a disappointment in your own behavior or your own response to a situation. So for any of you that remember the Sarah's Clapham Junction meltdown moment, I was very disappointed in how I responded to that situation, which I only learned through kind of discussion with Sarah after it. For anybody that doesn't know that moment, it was just a moment towards the end of the year.
I feel like that moment has become famous. I'm like, how has that become a thing?
The Clapham Junction meltdown moment. It wasn't that bad. Basically, there was a situation at the end of last year when we had an awful lot of work on, and I didn't support Sarah in a way that I'm proud of. So I was disappointed in my response to supporting Sarah in that situation, and I learned a lot from it. So that was a disappointment in my own behavior and my response. You could be disappointed in other people's behavior, which might have been what Sarah was thinking at the time. Like, great co-founder you are, Helen. But that could be part of the disappointment. Like, you wanted someone else to behave or react in a certain way. That I had that a little bit with my husband when it was our book launch. He didn't even text me on the day, and I was a bit disappointed that he hadn't even remembered to text me. He has since bought me some flowers, so we're friends now. But that was sort of like a disappointment in someone else's behavior. So that could be like an expectation reality gap. And then there is an outcome. So maybe you didn't get the result that you wanted. So there were certain things that happened for us, for example, in January, like our very first book launch moment, which we talk about on the podcast, which was the event that we did in London. I don't know if any of you came to it, but that was quite a disappointing outcome, because even though it was a really great positive event and a moment, Sarah couldn't be there. So there are all these different types of disappointment. And I wondered if you could think about, maybe we'll just do this on the screen, if you could have a think about a disappointment that you have experienced, maybe in the past, past couple of months, and let me know by putting a star on the screen, whether that disappointment that you have experienced was in your own behavior or your own reaction to a situation, in somebody else's behavior or reaction, or maybe in the outcome, not getting what you wanted. Sarah's put this into chat, but Sandra, or for anyone else that's new, the way that you do stars on the screen is you go up to view options and then annotate and then stamp and then star. But the question is, if you just kind of reflect on a recent disappointment, was that a disappointment in your own behavior, someone else's behavior, or the outcome, you kind of not getting what you wanted? Let us know. Let's see if there's any themes. Stick them on those circles and let's see. So maybe more of an outcome, maybe an outcome orientated disappointment. I think it's worth you like, if you can bear to do it and you can reflect on like 5 recent disappointments, it's quite useful to see whether there are any trends in that. Like, are you repeatedly disappointed in the outcomes that you're getting to? And does that tell you anything about the expectation reality gap? Or is it repeatedly about your own behavior in a situation, and might you need to reflect and do something differently? So we're just talking about maybe one recent one here, but if you can reflect on a few more, you might be able to spot some trends and themes that might help you to reset the reality a little bit.
And Helen, some people saying in chat sometimes it can be all 3. And I think when it's all 3, that's the hardest. So
yeah,
I suppose you've almost got the perfect storm of, you're sort of disappointed in yourself, you're disappointed in other people, and you're disappointed in the outcome. And I was thinking back to a few examples in my career of disappointments probably we didn't talk about in the podcast, and there definitely were times where that kind of triumphant of the O's come together. And I think that makes it particularly hard. You probably really need to think about some of the ideas for action in those moments. Whereas I think if it's one, it's probably slightly easier to deal with. You've got sort of slightly less to get your head around. So all three, I think, is hard.
Yeah. 3 O's equals overwhelming, perhaps, but not something that you can't respond to and learn from. But yeah, I think it's a really hard thing. But I think it's probably worth recognizing that, like, if you're in a situation, you're thinking, okay, this is a disappointment. If you do have like all 3 O's, don't be too hard on yourself or expect yourself to recover right away, because that's quite a lot for you to work with, and that's fine. But know that and be kind to yourself about why you might be feeling the way you're feeling.
And I love Nita's observation there, that some of those can be a trigger for another one. And I think actually in some of our more recent disappointments, though we might have been disappointed in other people and in outcomes, I think it, exactly to Nita's point, triggered me to think, I don't want to be disappointed in my own response. I am going to work so hard here to feel good about how the thing that I can control, which is my reactions, my responses. And that can feel so hard when, we talked about the emotions you feel, whether you feel blamey or angry or however, because you're always feeling these kind of quite big emotions that are often negative and won't drive you to useful behaviours. So I think in that moment, really think about the bit that you can control the most is your own response. And so that's the thing that you can sort of take control of. And so notice if it's triggering any of those behaviours that you wouldn't feel good about.
So we also talked on the podcast about your default response to disappointment. So as well as understanding what are the types of disappointments that I might have like as a trigger, also understanding your default response can help you work out whether you might want to do something different. So for example, the first response that we talked about is sort of like the passive response to disappointment. So this is sort of this is kind of distraction, denial, like if I ignore it, it might go away. Maybe even sulking. You're like, this is just rubbish. This is just rubbish situation. And I think if you've got a passive response to disappointment, that's where pessimism can creep in quite a bit, because you're like, this is just rubbish. I can't do anything about it. This is just nothing ever goes my way. We've talked about those sort of, we call them pessimism P's, of when it feels pervasive and personal and permanent. That sort of is what starts to seep in when you get quite passive about your response to disappointment. We also talked about a slightly more aggressive response to disappointment, which is where you might be like, well, this isn't because of me, it's because of them. And you blame, or maybe you go one step further and you like seek out revenge. Well, if you won't give me that job, then I'm not going to be supportive in a meeting. And you start to get sort of, the victim becomes a bit of a vendetta, and you start to kind of be aggressive, because you're just putting your energy, this way that you're feeling, the emotions that you're feeling, into this aggression. But that also might not help you deal with disappointment in a positive way. And what we really want to have is a much more assertive response. So if this one is really about kind of almost like think sort of sulking, and this one's maybe more about sort of blame, this one is more about sort of the learning. It's more about, what can I take from this? What has this taught me about myself or other people? What would I do differently next time? It's those sorts of insights. Now that, I think, is quite an evolved response. That is the aim. And getting to that straight away in the middle of a disappointment is a bit of an aspiration, but it is the aim to be in a situation where we've got a gap between the expectation and the reality. And we are able to look at that and learn and say, well, why did that happen? And why am I feeling this way? And what would I do differently? Is this sort of assertive response that we want to aim for? Just out of interest, where do you think you go first? Put stars on the screen. Are you the sort of person who gets a bit sulky and a bit, maybe a bit pessimism creeps in, or nothing ever goes my way? Do you get a bit aggressive? Are you like, it's that person's fault, they didn't see my potential, I'm going to enact my revenge? Or are you already that person that can always be balanced, always be neutral, emotions are at bay, and you go to what you can learn? Sarah and I said, I hope you don't mind, Sarah, I said that I can be quite passive, like a bit like, I'll just do something else. Sarah can be Slightly aggressive is your default response. Fair?
When you say slightly, depending on the level of that disappointment. But I think Anya's making a really good point. I do think we're not trying to shut down these feelings, but your feelings don't have to be then what you choose to do. So it's okay to get angry, it's okay to get upset, it's okay to sulk. I feel like we need those emotions to be able to get through disappointment, but those emotions don't then have to translate into what we do or to what other people see, or we might choose very carefully. Like Helen knows I would get really angry, but I would really hope, and a few people have actually listened to the podcast and told me this, they were like, oh, I would never have known like that. And I was like, oh, okay, yeah. I now feel like that podcast means that now people know that I would get really angry, but I don't think people would see that necessarily in then the emails that I would send or the conversations I have, because you can still choose to respond in a different way. But so I don't think this is about not being passive or being aggressive, because we're all human, but it is about, I think if you notice, back to coaching and about how important it is to notice, if you've got the self-awareness to notice how you respond, then it does help you to pause for thought. Like, because I know I get aggressive, it means that there's no way I'm sending an email in that hour, or even maybe sometimes in that day. There's probably no way I'm picking up a random phone call, because I'll think I might not have a very good conversation right now. And so you might just help you to think a bit about the actions you take.
Mm-hmm. I think as well, if you've got a team where there's a high level of safety in there, understanding this about each other means you can see it. Like if for example, Sarah is not an actually aggressive person, so if I'm seeing that kind of behavior, there's probably something else going on. So you can see, and I think you can support a bit better when you know this about each other. But I think having a team conversation about disappointment is not an easy one to have, so you do have to have quite a lot of vulnerability and safety in a team situation to be able to do that. So I'm just going to clear your things off. We're going to go into the breakout now, everyone. So I think hopefully kind of good to just get us warmed up to the idea of disappointment and just thinking about it a little bit. And what we're going to do in the breakout room is to get you thinking about what has helped you recover from disappointment in the past. Now, if you want to share the disappointment that you're kind of referring to, all good, but you don't have to. Like, it's up to you in the group situation. If it helps you to bring it to life, brilliant. But otherwise, just think about, you can just say generically, in terms of disappointment that I experienced, the thing that really helped me to recover from it was whatever. Maybe it's people, maybe it was something that you did to distract you, maybe it was something that you reflected on things that you were doing well. I don't know, but you don't have to share the disappointment if that feels uncomfortable, but think and share maybe what has helped you. And we're going to come back together, maybe get a bit of insight into those different things that have helped you. And then Sarah's got some ideas for action. What I'll do now is I'm going to stop sharing. Sarah's going to put us into the breakout rooms. There'll be sort of...
Feel free now to head into chat and just let us know any insights you heard, any ideas you heard, anything you'd like to share with everybody else, so that we can borrow brilliance from the conversations that we weren't part of. Because I always think, I hope that those conversations felt useful. Maybe you got to meet somebody that you don't know. I'm sure you did get to meet somebody you don't know, but what felt like it was helpful to find your way through disappointment. I'll just give you all a second to just do a bit of tapping into chat, and then I'm going to give you just a couple of ideas just before we go off for the rest of our Thursdays. Welcome back, everyone. We've got a few people.
I love that ranting. I love that.
Welcome back. We're just putting in chat what's helped. What did you hear that you think, oh, I'm going to do that next time? What has helped you? Just so we can sort of fill the chat up with loads of ideas for action. So pausing, pressing pause, Sarah, yeah, to stop and reframe. Very good. Very good if you can, particularly if you can do that in the moment. Talking it through with someone you trust. Yeah, Richard, I think that is critical. Like someone who's just on your side, supportive, and you feel incredibly safe having that conversation. Meditation, Maria, lovely. Still on my to-do list. Do you know what, Tanya, mini eggs is also where I went. I also had mini eggs. I really like mini eggs. And I
She's getting really excited about mini eggs now. It's like, oh, a mini egg.
Mini eggs and Skittles I ate a lot of for a couple of weeks. Letting go of the outcome. Yeah, that's interesting, Anya. I think one of the things that I noted down was this idea of, when you are dealing with disappointment, I think having that stubbornly adaptive mindset that Adam Morgan talked to us about is really helpful. What do I need to let go of, and what am I going to hold on to? I found that really useful. And if you're like me and you're really outcome based, I'm very achievement orientated, letting go of achievements and outcomes feels really hard, but you sometimes have to. That thing has happened. You can't change that outcome, but I can hold on to some other things like, why are we doing it in the first place? What might I do differently next time? What else can I get excited about? So that stubbornly adaptive mindset helped me to just sort of work out, let go, hold on to. I think quite a lot of you are talking a bit about this, like we need to talk about our disappointment. One of the ideas for action in the podcast this week was, which I found really helpful, don't just say you're disappointed, say you're disappointed and name those emotions. And that was really, really useful for me, whether it's writing them down or saying them out loud. And it took me a bit of time to work out what the and was, but it stops you. I think it helps you to figure out, are you feeling more passive? Are you feeling more angry? Are you feeling more passive aggressive? And also, we don't react in the same way every time. You know, we're not sort of robots that are programmed to work the same way. And I can think of some disappointments where I've responded in one way, some in a very different way. So just name that emotion, do the and, talked about stubbornly adaptive mindset. Oh, I'm glad that felt powerful. And then the last thing to remember, and the more research you read on this, it feels like it's definitely true and it's helped both of us, is the do something else. You know, I talked about in the podcast, you can't feel that positive about that thing in that moment. I didn't find it helpful. I couldn't say, oh, but all this other good stuff is happening. I was like, I don't care. I still feel really disappointed. But if you can get excited about something else, or if you can get distracted by something else that just you're excited about or is important in a different part of your life, it can just help us to sort of, I think, give us a bit of a break and to give us the time that we then need to deal with the disappointment. I now feel in a way better position to be able to deal with some of the disappointments of the first 6 weeks of this year, but I could not have done it in the moment. And initially I tried to, and then was a bit disappointed in myself that I couldn't deal with my own disappointment. And once I started to kind of let go of that and just be like, there's some other things I'm going to think about and do and get excited about, it just gives you that space.
There's a lot of flower love going on.
There is a lot of flower love, isn't there? Do you know what? Someone actually did also send me flowers that week. I got COVID and it really cheered me up. So thank you all so much. Reminder, no Pod Plus next week, no Helen on half term, and I'm running an in-person session, unfortunately. But don't forget, we do have the pod sheets. I was saying to Helen, I can take no credit for it, but I thought this week's pod sheet was really helpful. Pod sheets are a really good summary of everything that we cover in the podcast. They have coach yourself questions, they have ideas for action, and they have recommended resources. So they're always on our website under the podcast page. You can get a link to them in show notes, and we do one every single week. And there's a lot of historical ones as well. So thank you so much, everybody. I'm glad you like my t-shirt. Thank you. And we will see you all in 2 weeks' time. Thank you all for joining. Lovely to see everyone.
Enjoy, everybody. See you all soon. Bye.
Bye.